Welcome to Tournament. How this works, we're going to have 16 different people, places, things, ideas, stuff like that. We pit them against each other in a tournament. We have two co-hosts today. Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Look, I wasn't prepared. I didn't know there was going to be hard-hitting questions right off the top. So check my Wikipedia. You'll learn everything you need to know.
And Lauren, same for you. Tell us a little about yourself.
I have all 10 fingers and 10 toes. I know, watch out. I know others that don't, so I'm not bragging. I'm just saying it's been a problem my whole life.
The two of you are joining me on today's episode of Tournament called Suspension. Everything appearing in today's episode has to do with suspension in one way or another. The first one, in-school suspension. That's when you mess up at school. They put you in a separate area all by yourself. Number two, mud. Mud, scientifically speaking, is a suspension of dirt in water. Item three, Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers is a fictional character that was in suspended animation, and he lasted from the 20th century all the way to the 24th century in a science fiction series of the 70s. Number four, Khan Noonien Singh. You might recognize him from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Item five, Idiocracy, in which a military dummy is put in suspended animation and wakes up in the future as the smartest man alive. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a politician and presidential candidate who has suspended his campaign. The end of World War II. Hostilities were suspended. The suspension of your car. Those are the springs in your car's wheels that make sure that you don't have a bumpy ride. Futurama, in which the main character is put into suspended animation and wakes up in the future. Cable television is on the list because if you don't pay, your service gets suspended. Onto the list goes suspension bridges, going from one side of something to the other. The uterus. The uterus is suspended within the female body by other organs. Suspending immigration into the United States. It's something that the president did again this week. Fraternities. Fraternities, when they mess up, they get their license suspended and they can't be frats anymore. Plaster encased limbs. When you break a bone, it gets suspended in plaster. Last item for us on the list go suspenders. They keep your pants up. Jason, who are your contestants?
I have got in-school suspension, which I've never experienced before. I've got the suspension of your car. I have got cable television. I've got a uterus, much to everyone's surprise. And I have got plaster casts.
Cool. How do you feel about the strength of your team?
My team, it's a scrappy bunch of kids from the local neighborhood, and they are in it to win it.
Lauren, tell us, who are your contestants?
The championship team here, we have Mud, which who doesn't love a good mud bath? We also have Bernie Sanders, and I repeat again, I love him. Also to be contended with is suspension bridges because they're mildly terrifying. We have fraternities, which are also mildly terrifying and gross, like mud. And then we have suspenders to hold everything together.
How do you feel about the strength of your team?
I mean, I feel like we could get through thick and thin and take a lot of hits and come out on top.
And here are the five teammates that I've got. These are pop culture heavy, but that's how I like it. First off, I've got Buck Rogers, Khan Noonien Singh, Idiocracy, The End of World War II, and Futurama. I feel really strong about this because I feel like everyone has heard of most of these things, and they're all very, very likable. But there's no way in hell I'm going to take suspending immigration. So,
woo! Thank goodness.
None of us are going to touch that one. And you know who else shouldn't have touched that one? President of the United States. We've got our teams. let's move into the tournament round. Here's match number 1. It is the end of World War II versus Futurama. Okay, both of those are mine, so that's unfortunate. I feel like I'm going to lose one no matter what.
I'm leaning towards giving it to Futurama only in that it encapsulates that event. Like the end of World War II, I believe, was probably the topic of one of the episodes of Futurama.
I too would have to go with Futurama. I know very little about that, but I know more about that than I know about a lot of history events because I attended a school where they thought history wasn't real. So I would go with Futurama.
Now, I want to check in on this school, Lauren.
The book ended at a certain point, so I'm just kind of floating in the abyss right now.
I would like to just put something out there for the end of World War II because it's a proven fact. If the end of World War II hadn't happened, it would still be going on and life would super suck.
I'm not sure that it can suck more than now, but hey, you know what? Sure.
So just imagine everything that's happening right now, and also World War II is still happening.
All right. I don't like that.
I'm going to stick with Futurama.
I'm going to switch teams and go to the end of the war because I can't imagine things being any worse. So I'm switching sides. I'm falling into believing history.
Then I cast my tiebreaker vote for the end of World War II. As much as I love Futurama, I got to go with the end of the war because I think that's probably the historically responsible thing to do. Round 2, the uterus versus cable TV. Lauren, I feel like you should go first in debating both of those because I have a feeling you own at least one of those two things.
Yeah, I don't have a cable box anymore. So having a uterus, I can't say there are a lot of pros to this. Cable TV can provide hours of entertainment, unlike an organ. So even though I have one, I'm going to go with the TV.
So are you saying that a uterus cannot provide hours of entertainment then?
Maybe not hours.
My case is that, interestingly enough, with both the uterus and with cable TV, there's a lot of talk about cutting the cord. I do still think that cable TV probably comes out in the lead on that one.
Having a uterus is not an advantage in society, so why would it be an advantage in any argument, honestly?
Can I make more comparisons between the cable box or cable TV and the uterus?
I'm going to go with cable TV.
I second that. Yes, cable TV. Cable TV is the winner.
I feel good about that. I think you guys made the right choice.
Match 3, the suspension of immigration versus Buck Rogers.
With Buck Rogers, we know that there's a couple different iterations of that. We've got the old TV show, Buck Rogers, and then we've got Battlestar Galactica, which I think is the same thing. Am I mistaken on that?
On behalf of nerds and pop culture fanatics everywhere, I should point out that they are two completely different things.
I would pick Buck Rogers on the sole fact that I thought he was the love child between Bucky and Captain America, Steve Rogers and Bucky. So I was like, yeah. And I Googled him and I was disappointed, but like that's still 10 times better. Even like the pretend thought of that than the suspension of immigration.
I am going to beady vote for Buck Rogers.
Match 4 is suspenders versus in-school suspension.
Oh, wow, it's interesting. Someone who has never had an ISS doesn't know how to begin to talk about the topic. Well, let me tell you something about suspenders. Personally, I've owned at least 3 different pairs, and they have helped me both look stylish and hold my pants up in the era of the early 2000s low-rise jean fad. There's nothing worse than a small little bit of butt crack, but guess what doesn't allow that is suspenders.
So why did you need 3 different pairs? Let me ask that.
I mean, you have to have your going out to Warped Tour pair. So if they get yanked on a little bit, it's fine. You got them at the like I Heart Boobies tent. You have to have your Christmas pair because there's nothing more festive than Christmas suspenders with little Santas. Then you have to have your fancy pants pair, the pair that you wear in your college improv group on stage so your pants don't fall down when you do a somersault.
All right, Jason, tell me why in-school suspension should win.
Well, because there's mystery to it. Whenever someone would be gone from class, there was always this assumption that they were in-school suspension. And what does that even mean? ISS. Oh, that sounds like some sort of paramilitary organization or something. But as it turns out, it's just where the badass kids would go after they were done being badasses, and they would go off. And I tend to think that those kids that had gone into in-school suspension probably grew up with a little more character, probably grew up with a little bit more verve, a little bit more joie de vivre for life. And I think that's probably where I went south. On the subject of suspenders, I do want to say the only pair I've ever owned were when I worked at a movie theater and I had to wear suspenders with my fake tuxedo shirt that had ruffles all up and down it, and it was stained with popcorn butter. I don't want that to influence your decision at all, John.
Because, Lauren, you use suspenders in improv, I think suspenders are going to have to win.
Thank you. They deserve the win.
Okay, match 5. The suspension of your car versus con.
I'm going to say 2 words in regards to car suspension. Ricardo Montalban. If you recall, he would always talk about the Cordoba as a fantastic luxury automobile with the rich Corinthian leather. And he would certainly insist on a luxury, smooth ride as it would go down the potholed streets of the late 70s, early 80s. And so I think, honestly, the one thing that Ricardo Montalban is known for is cars that would have good car suspensions. Nothing else, regardless of what you might hear in the next argument.
Jason, you and I are almost exactly the same age, but I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Everyone, when they hear con, they think Ricardo Montalban. He is an iconic figure. He was so iconic that they brought him back, and who played him? Benedict Cumberbatch. That's who.
Both of you brought up great points, and both of you brought up names I've never heard before. So, on the basis of that, and going off of which I would enjoy the company of more, I'm going to go with a car suspension.
I feel that's the right choice, and I feel that everybody who's watching this right now is yelling con at you, John.
Match 6, plaster casts versus fraternities.
I have actually had a plaster cast before. This was in 5th grade, and one of the best things about a plaster cast is that it gets you out of playing the violin. If you break your arm in 5th grade when you are in the orchestra, you no longer have to do that. And I think that's probably the strongest selling point I have for a plaster cast.
There's not a lot of great things to say about fraternities other than they have fun names. The Greek letters make them look like alien names when you see them on the back of those like SUV sport cars that the boys have that they drive through town. So I like to think they have little aliens inside of their cars. Yeah, they're just big houses that smell like Axe body spray if you're into that kind of thing.
As it turns out, I am not into that kind of thing. And also, as it turns out, I would rather break my arm than be in a fraternity. So I'm going to have to go with plaster casts. Match 7, Mud versus Idiocracy.
Let's just go with this. Mud has multiple uses. You can use it as a mask. You can use it to clog your neighbor's exhaust on their car. You can also use it to feed plants that you like. And it makes a fun sound when you squish it, which I could not say the same for a movie.
I would like for you to vote for Idiocracy. That is a shockingly accurate view of what the future is going to look like. We're going to be watering crops with soda. Terry Crews will be our president. And all of the other things that happen in that movie are on their way to happening now.
What I could say is that ultimately, that's a pretty big bummer, John. And I'm not here for it. I do have to vote for Mud. If you had been able to include Squishy into your argument about a dystopic future, I might have been there.
Here's our last match of the preliminary round. Suspension Bridges versus Bernie Sanders.
I was out at the Konza Prairie this very past weekend, and they have a small suspension bridge. And I was just left with this sort of sense of awe of human ingenuity, that you're able to completely create something that conveys you from one side of the chasm to the other with nothing in the middle. I think that's the dream. I think we peaked at that point in society, and it's pretty much been downhill from there.
I'm going to pitch that maybe Bernie Sanders should win this one, because for God's sake, I need him to win something. While other types of bridges could perform the same function as a suspension bridge, nobody else can do what Bernie can.
I'm changing my vote. I really do think Bernie Sanders has earned this.
I'm so glad that you guys made the right decision.
So we're going back to the top. The end of World War II versus cable television. If the end of World War II hadn't happened, cable television wouldn't happen. Instead of there being a cable television box, there'd be a Hitler on top of your television telling you what to do every single day. Is that what you want? I don't think so.
If you watch the History Channel, 1 out of 1 shows somehow involves that insufferable bastard.
Since I only have the knowledge of the end of a book, I didn't know about the end of World War II if it wasn't for cable TV. So I'm going to have to go with cable TV because it's taught me what I need to know.
Next round, Buck Rogers versus Suspenders. Buck Rogers takes place in the future, and it's a roadmap for exactly how we are going to be in the future. Forget all that stuff about Idiocracy. Idiocracy didn't even win. Buck Rogers is where the future is at, okay? We're all going to be floating around on spaceships wearing white jumpsuits with teeny tiny little robots, okay? That's how we're going to be in the future, and that's a future I want to live in.
I know you said he's the gateway to the future, but what's going to hold his space pants up if not for suspenders?
There's only one suspenders, Lauren. He's wearing a jumpsuit. Jumpsuit negates the need for suspenders.
Listen, I don't want to hear I don't believe in jumpsuits. There's only one way to wear pants, and it's with suspenders.
I have got to give it to Buck Rogers because that man knew how to wear something that zipped from all the way down.
Next match. Your car's suspension versus plaster casts.
Suspension on a car is something that we become almost overly reliant on. When it's not there, things get nasty. And when things get nasty, I think what you end up with is that ultimately you would end up breaking your arm in the car. That would lead to a plaster cast. And honestly, let's be honest, it's pretty cool when you get your one friend from 3rd grade to sign your cast. Plaster cast. I think it's the plaster cast. Oh, wait, you guys get a vote, don't you? Sorry, I was off in a pretty fantastic place.
Just for the pure nostalgia of it, and I mean, not that I can relate, I've never broken a bone, but I'm going to go with plaster cast because they just sound so cozy. And I like signatures. I
am going to vote myself for car suspensions because I use a car suspension every day. I have never, ever used a plaster cast. So, Jason, you get the tiebreaker.
I'm gonna give it to plaster cast.
All right.
Let's be honest, it's a lot of fun to say.
Last match of this round, Mud versus Bernie Sanders.
Mud would only defeat Bernie in one scenario, which is an Indiana Jones movie where Bernie was in a pit of mud and he had nobody there to help him. None of his loyal followers were there to reach a hand out to help him. So that's the only way Mud would defeat him. Now, the ways that Bernie Sanders can defeat Mud are endless. Unfortunately, he can't use those tactics to defeat others when it comes to political things, but we're working on that. We're going to get him there at some point. But, I mean, he could just step on Mud and Mud's defeated.
Although I dispute stepping on Mud defeating it, I am going to give it to Bernie Sanders. I do believe that the people and Bernie Sanders will carry the win forward.
I hate to argue the other case, but I'm going to vote for Mud because I think Bernie is getting older, and I think it would not take much mud to take him down. So, Lauren, you get the tiebreaker.
You've both brought valid points to the table. I didn't think about the age thing. I'm just assuming he's going to live forever, like Yoda. But I'm going to go with Bernie because he is the the human Yoda to me. So
we move on to the semifinal round. There are only 2 matches in this round. In this match, you have to tell what is the weakness of your candidate. First match, cable TV versus Buck Rogers. First, Jason, tell us, what are the weaknesses of cable TV?
I think the one weakness of cable TV is that you cannot order anything a la carte. I think it's that you have to have the History Channel with those Hitler shows just to get Nick at Night.
And the weakness of Buck Rogers, if it was really any good, it would have been rebooted by now. So it's probably crap on toast.
despite being crap on toast, I feel like there's a rarity to Buck Rogers that isn't there with cable TV, because with cable TV you have it all, as Jason pointed out. It's all there. Whereas with Buck Rogers, you might not. And sometimes having it all is too much. So I'm going to go with Buck Rogers because I don't always want it all.
Plaster casts versus Bernie Sanders. Jason, you get to start us off. Tell us what's wrong with plaster casts.
I think there's a reason that they are no longer around. You can lose so many things in a plaster cast. And honestly, I think that's where most of the votes for Bernie Sanders ended up.
You run into a lot of broken bones?
I think you ask a lot of questions.
All right, Lauren, tell us what's wrong with Bernie Sanders.
What's wrong with him is that he is apparently just below what's acceptable in this country to run it. So, you know, that's the one thing that's wrong with him.
Even with his weaknesses, I'm still going to have to vote for Bernie. Bernie gets my vote in this one, which sends to the final round, Buck Rogers versus Bernie Sanders.
We all knew this was the matchup of the century. We saw this coming.
They make movies about this kind of stuff.
If we're talking about age, Buck Rogers is nearly 500 years old. And sure, he was in suspended animation for most of the time. But that means that to win the suspension category, no one is more qualified than Buck Rogers because he spent almost his entire life in suspension.
Bernie should win suspension because, much like Buck Rogers, he has spent a lot of his political career in suspension of the one thing that he needs to continue going, the votes of the American people. Buck Rogers isn't real, and Bernie Sanders is oh so very real, and he could do so much for us. So he should win no matter what the category is.
All right, Jason. It's a very difficult decision between Buck Rogers and Bernie Sanders. Hopefully you're up to it.
It really is. I think that when we look to the future, we want to believe that there will be the opportunity for space travel, that we will have the opportunity to fight for what's right, to get out there and just, you know, have those robots that say beady, beady, beady. And I think that's really only possible if we allow ourselves to hope the way that we have hoped and allow ourselves to hurt the way that we have hurt, knowing full well that the passion that was sparked by Bernie Sanders will carry us on to the 24th and a half century.
Even though he may not have won the presidency, he has won today's tournament. Congratulations, Bernie Sanders, winner of the suspension tournament. Oh, look.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Lauren. It's been a heck of a tournament. Thank you all for watching today's episode of Tournament. We'll see you again on another episode.
So I should put my pants on before I make noise? Because I'm taking them off every time I'm not on camera. Is that a problem?
Yeah.